Behind the bright lights of Nashville and the glory of the Grand Ole Opry, many country singers lived dangerously offstage. Fame brought them money, fans, and endless invitations to wild parties. But for some, the celebrations became their downfall. From legends whose voices defined generations to rising stars full of promise, reckless nights of booze, drugs, and scandal destroyed careers and lives. 1. Hank Williams Sr. Hank Williams Sr. remains one of the most iconic figures in the history of country music. With timeless hits like Your Cheating Heart and I'm So Lonesome I Could Cry, he set the foundation for the genre as we know it. In the late 1940s and early 1950s, no one captured heartbreak and raw human emotion the way Hank did. His powerful voice and haunting lyrics turned him into a superstar, celebrated on the stage of the Grand Ole Opry, and adored by fans across America. Yet behind the curtain, Hank's life was spinning out of control. From the very start of his fame, Hank was drawn to the darker side of success. He was known for showing up late to performances, if he showed up at all. Alcohol became both his escape and his undoing, fueling nights of heavy drinking that left him unreliable and unstable. Partying was more than a pastime, it was a destructive pattern. Friends and bandmates recalled chaotic nights where Hank's charm would vanish, replaced by anger, erratic behavior, and the haze of intoxication. Nashville quickly learned that the golden boy of country music was living a double life, one that no amount of talent could fully cover. As his career reached new heights, the consequences of his wild lifestyle grew harder to ignore. His marriage to Audrey Williams was plagued by infidelity, fights, and the toll of his addictions. Promoters began to lose faith in him. Audiences complained about missed shows, and the Grand Ole Opry, once his proudest stage, banned him in 1952 due to his unreliability and constant drinking. By then, Hank's reputation as a gifted yet troubled artist overshadowed his music. The final chapter of his story came tragically fast. On New Year's Day, 1953, Hank Williams Sr. was found dead in the backseat of his Cadillac at just 29 years old. The official cause was heart failure, worsened by years of drinking and painkiller abuse. The man who had revolutionized country music had destroyed himself before his 30th birthday. His legend only grew after his death, but so did the cautionary tale. Even the brightest stars can burn out when the party never stops. Hank's downfall wasn't just the end of a life. It was the first warning shot to Nashville about the price of excess. His wild nights may have given him stories to tell, but in the end, they robbed country music of one of its greatest voices far too soon. Paul George Jones. If Hank Williams Sr. was country music's first tragic cautionary tale, George Jones became its most infamous survivor. Known for his powerhouse voice and legendary songs like He Stopped Loving Her Today and The Grand Tour, Jones earned the nickname The Possum for his distinct look and vocal twang. But behind his artistry, George developed another nickname that haunted him for decades, No Show Jones. It wasn't without reason. His wild lifestyle made him one of the most unreliable performers in Nashville history. Jones's career soared in the 1960s and 1970s, but fame only fueled his destructive habits. He partied endlessly, surrounded by alcohol, drugs, and chaos. Stories of his reckless behavior became the stuff of country legend. One of the most infamous tales told of him riding a lawnmower 8 miles down a highway just to buy liquor after his wife locked away the car keys. These antics, while colorful to some, were signs of a man losing control of his life. The consequences soon followed. Promoters and fans grew frustrated when Jones would cancel shows at the last minute or fail to appear entirely. Venues lost money, audiences felt betrayed, and his reputation began to unravel. The nickname No Show Jones wasn't just a joke. It was a scarlet letter that nearly ended his career. Even his marriages, most notably to fellow country superstar Tammy Wynette, collapsed under the strain of his addiction and wild partying. By the late 1970s, George's career was on the brink of collapse. His health deteriorated, his finances dwindled, and even the Nashville establishment questioned if he had any future left in music. But unlike Hank Williams Sr., Jones lived long enough to confront his demons. In the 1980s, he managed to make a comeback, recording some of his most powerful songs while staying sober for stretches of his later years. Still, the scars of his past never left him, and the image of the drunken outlaw followed him until his death in 2013 at the age of 81. George Jones's story is both a warning and a testament. His wild parties nearly destroyed everything he built, and for a time, they did. Yet his voice was so extraordinary that he earned redemption despite himself. In the end, he became proof that even the darkest chapters in country music's history can't erase a once-in-a-lifetime talent. Keith Whitley. Keith Whitley's name still carries a haunting weight in country music. Rising to fame in the 1980s with hits like Don't Close Your Eyes and When You Say Nothing at All, Whitley was seen as the future of traditional country. His smooth, emotional voice and authentic style reminded audiences of the greats who came before him, yet with a freshness that promised a long and successful career. But as fast as he ascended, his life unraveled, consumed by the same demons that haunted many of his predecessors: alcohol and reckless partying. Whitley grew up in Kentucky, where his early exposure to bluegrass gave him the musical foundation to excel in Nashville. By the time he signed with RCA Records, he had already lived a hard life on the road, one that included heavy drinking from a young age. Success only magnified the problem. Behind the scenes, Keith's nights were filled with endless bottles, chaotic parties, and a dangerous pattern of self-destruction. Friends, colleagues, and even his wife, singer Lori Morgan, witnessed his struggle and begged him to slow down. But the allure of the bottle was too strong. Unlike George Jones, Keith never got the chance to recover. In May 1989, at just 34 years old, he was found dead at home after a night of heavy drinking. His blood alcohol content was nearly 6 times the legal limit. Nashville was stunned. He was on the verge of superstardom, his career skyrocketing, his songs topping charts, and his fan base growing. His sudden death wasn't just tragic. It was a devastating reminder that addiction does not discriminate, not even against the brightest rising stars. The aftermath of Keith's passing left the country music world shaken. Industry insiders lamented the loss of a man who could have defined the sound of the 1990s. His influence, though, didn't vanish. Many singers who followed, from Alan Jackson to Garth Brooks, cited Whitley as an inspiration. His songs remain classics, but his story remains a stark warning. Even immense talent and adoration can't protect someone from the dangers of wild living. Keith Whitley's career was ruined not by scandal or fading popularity, but by the very lifestyle that country music so often romanticizes. His early death froze him in time, forever remembered as a what could have been. For fans, his music is bittersweet, brilliant, heartfelt, and shadowed by the tragic reality that he never got the chance to grow old in Nashville's spotlight. Few figures in country music are as controversial as David Allan Coe. Emerging in the 1970s during the outlaw country movement, Coe built his reputation on being unpredictable, raw, and unapologetically rebellious. Songs like You Never Even Called Me By My Name showcased his talent and humor, while his albums blended country with rock and blues in ways that appealed to audiences looking for something edgier. Yet behind the music, his love for wild parties, drugs, and scandalous behavior pushed him from rising star to outsider in the very world he helped shape. Coe's outlaw persona wasn't just an image, it was his life. He openly embraced a lifestyle of excess, surrounding himself with drugs, groupies, and nonstop chaos. Unlike many of his peers, who at least tried to balance the demands of fame with professionalism, Coe seemed to revel in being the industry's bad boy. His shows were often unpredictable, fueled by alcohol and wild partying that made him as infamous for his behavior as he was for his music. The consequences came swiftly. Record labels grew wary of working with him, fearing his unpredictable nature and the controversy surrounding some of his explicit songs. His reputation as a heavy partier alienated him from mainstream Nashville, and radio stations refused to play much of his music. While fellow outlaws like Waylon Jennings and Willie Nelson managed to balance their hard-living images with legendary careers, Coe became a cautionary tale of what happens when the wild lifestyle takes control. Stories of his excess were legendary. From drunken outbursts on stage to run-ins with the law, Coe never shied away from trouble. But his constant partying made him unreliable, limiting opportunities to tour or record with major labels. As a result, his career stagnated just when it might have reached greater heights. Instead of becoming a household name like Jennings or Nelson, Coe settled into cult status, known more for his scandals and outrageous reputation than his undeniable songwriting ability. In the end, David Allan Coe's wild parties didn't just tarnish his image. They cut short the trajectory of a career that could have been far bigger. While he remains a figure of fascination for die-hard outlaw country fans, his story underscores the fine line between living the outlaw life and letting it consume everything. Coe lived the party to the fullest, but it left him on the margins of country music, a man remembered as much for what he lost as for what he created. Johnny Paycheck. Johnny Paycheck's story is one of meteoric rise, reckless living, and a spectacular fall fueled by booze, brawls, and wild parties. Best known for his working-class anthem, "Take This Job and Shove It," Paycheck embodied the outlaw spirit of 1970s country music. His rough edge and rebellious persona connected instantly with fans who were tired of polished Nashville acts. But while his music celebrated independence and defiance, his personal life spiraled into chaos, leaving his career in shambles. Paycheck began his career as a respected sideman, playing bass and singing backup for legends like George Jones. By the time he struck out on his own, he had already developed a reputation for hard drinking and hard living. Success magnified those tendencies. At the height of his fame, Paycheck was rarely far from a bottle or a party. Friends and colleagues recalled nights that stretched into mornings, with alcohol, drugs, and violence never far away. His outlaw persona was real, and Nashville promoters soon realized they couldn't always count on him to show up ready to perform. The consequences of his wild lifestyle caught up quickly. Paycheck was notorious for bar fights, public drunkenness, and erratic behavior that alienated record labels and booking agents. While his hit songs topped the charts, his offstage life began to overshadow his music. His partying habits made him unreliable, and fans who once idolized him grew weary of missed shows and scandalous headlines. The most infamous chapter came in 1985 when Paycheck shot a man in an Ohio bar after a heated argument. Though he claimed self-defense, the incident was rooted in years of reckless partying and volatile behavior. Convicted of aggravated assault, he was sentenced to prison, effectively derailing his career. His time behind bars cemented his image as an outlaw, but it also stripped him of the momentum he had worked so hard to build. When he was eventually pardoned and released, Paycheck tried to restart his career, but the damage had been done. His reputation as an unreliable and troubled star lingered, and his health, worsened by years of excess, limited his ability to stage a comeback. He spent his later years battling illness and financial struggles before passing away in 2003 at the age of 64. Johnny Paycheck's wild parties and dangerous lifestyle didn't just ruin opportunities, they destroyed the very foundation of his career. Today, he is remembered as a voice of defiance, a true outlaw, but also as a man whose talent was buried beneath the weight of his own self-destruction. His story remains one of Nashville's starkest reminders that the outlaw dream often comes at a devastating cost. Sammi Smith. Sammi Smith's voice was unlike any other in country music. Sultry, soulful, and filled with emotion that cut straight to the heart. In 1971, she became a household name with her Grammy-winning hit, "Help Me Make It Through the Night," a song that challenged the conservative norms of Nashville and cemented her as one of the leading female voices of her era. For a time, Sammi stood shoulder to shoulder with the giants of country, praised for her daring song choices and magnetic performances. But behind her smoky vocals and free-spirited image, Smith was slipping into a lifestyle of wild parties, substance abuse, and self-destruction that would ultimately derail her career. Sammi was drawn to the outlaw movement, embracing its defiance and raw honesty. She surrounded herself with fellow outlaws like Waylon Jennings and Willie Nelson, becoming part of the inner circle that redefined country music in the 1970s. But the same lifestyle that gave her artistic freedom also pulled her into a dangerous cycle. Nights of drinking, drug use, and endless partying became the norm. Nashville insiders whispered about her unreliability and unpredictable behavior, and slowly, her opportunities began to dwindle. Her career decline wasn't immediate. Sammi continued to record and perform throughout the decade, but the spark that once made her a star dimmed under the weight of her chaotic personal life. The wild parties robbed her of consistency and professionalism, and her reputation shifted from being one of country's boldest talents to one of its most troubled. By the 1980s, she was struggling to find a place in an industry that had little patience for instability, especially for female artists. What made Sammi's downfall especially tragic was her immense talent. She had the ability to interpret a song with rare intimacy, making listeners feel every word. Yet the lifestyle she embraced, nights of excess, bad relationships, and a refusal to conform, left her sidelined. Instead of being remembered as a dominant voice of her generation, she became a cautionary example of squandered potential. In her later years, Sammi faded from the spotlight. She performed occasionally but never regained the prominence she once held. She passed away in 2005 at the age of 61, her legacy overshadowed by what might have been. Though her voice still echoes through her recordings, the memory of her wild lifestyle remains tied to her story. Sammi Smith's career serves as a reminder that the outlaw life, so alluring in country music mythology, often came with a heavy price. Her wild parties didn't just ruin her career, they silenced one of the genre's most unique and unforgettable voices far too soon. 7. Waylon Jennings. Waylon Jennings was one of the architects of outlaw country, a man whose deep voice and rebellious spirit reshaped Nashville in the 1970s. With hits like Good-Hearted Woman and Luckenbach, Texas, Back to the Basics of Love, Jennings gave country music grit, authenticity, and swagger. To fans, he was a legend, a larger-than-life figure who embodied freedom and defiance. But to those who knew him well, his wild lifestyle, fueled by cocaine, pills, and marathon parties, nearly destroyed him and threatened to erase his legacy before it could be cemented. By the height of his fame, Jennings was living life at full speed. Money poured in from record sales and tours, and Waylon spent much of it on drugs and endless parties. He later admitted to spending thousands of dollars a day on cocaine, surrounding himself with chaos and excess. Backstage, he was often more consumed by the party than the performance, and those close to him worried that the drugs were eating him alive. The impact on his career was undeniable. Jennings became unreliable, missing studio sessions and showing up to shows drained from nights of partying. His health declined, and his finances, despite his immense success, suffered under the weight of addiction. For years, he teetered on the edge, a man celebrated by millions, but privately collapsing under his lifestyle. Nashville insiders whispered that the great outlaw might not survive the decade. Waylon's wild ways also strained his relationships. Bandmates, collaborators, and even his family bore the burden of his addiction. Yet despite the destruction, his charisma and raw talent kept him afloat. Fans still packed his shows, and his outlaw image ironically grew stronger the more he embraced the chaos. But the cost was mounting, and Jennings himself later admitted that he had become a prisoner of the very lifestyle he helped glorify. The turning point came in the 1980s, when Waylon decided to confront his demons. With the support of his wife, Jessie Coulter, he eventually quit cocaine and began to regain control of his life. While he managed to revive parts of his career and continued recording into the 1990s, the years of hard living had already taken their toll. His health declined rapidly, and he battled diabetes and heart problems until his death in 2002 at the age of 64. Waylon Jennings' story is one of brilliance nearly undone by excess. His wild parties didn't erase his contributions to country music, but they scarred his body, his reputation, and his career. In the end, he stands as both a legend of rebellion and a warning about how the outlaw dream can devour even its strongest champions. Gary Stewart. Gary Stewart, often hailed as the king of honky-tonk heartbreak, was one of country music's most distinctive voices in the 1970s. His high-pitched emotional delivery in hits like She's Actin' Single, I'm Drinkin' Doubles made him a favorite among barroom crowds and fans who connected with his raw portrayal of loneliness and regret. But while Stewart's music captured the pain of heartbreak, his personal life was consumed by the very vices he sang about. Alcohol, drugs, and wild partying not only shaped his songs, but also ruined the promising career that could have lifted him among the greats. Stewart's rise came quickly. By the mid-1970s, his records topped the charts, and critics praised him for bringing authenticity back to honky-tonk. Yet success only deepened his struggles. Already prone to heavy drinking, Stewart embraced a lifestyle of late-night parties, cocaine binges, and endless chaos. Friends and colleagues recalled how unpredictable he became, showing up to recording sessions either exhausted from partying or not showing up at all. The Nashville establishment, initially intrigued by his unique voice, began to back away as his reputation for instability grew. Unlike some of his outlaw contemporaries, Stewart lacked the support system to pull him back from the edge. His wild behavior made it hard for record labels and promoters to trust him. Despite his undeniable talent, his albums began to lose traction, and opportunities to headline tours slipped away. Fans who loved his raw honesty noticed his decline, as his performances became erratic and his public image darkened. The wild lifestyle also devastated his personal life. Stewart's marriage and family relationships suffered under the weight of addiction and constant partying. Friends worried that he was spiraling too far, but Stewart seemed unable or unwilling to slow down. By the 1980s, his career had virtually collapsed, leaving him adrift, remembered more for his excesses than his chart-topping songs. The tragedy of Gary Stewart came to its ultimate conclusion in 2003, when he died by suicide at the age of 59, just a month after his wife passed away. His death shocked those who still admired him, a stark reminder of the price paid by artists who never escaped the grip of self-destruction. Gary Stewart's story is perhaps one of the saddest in country music. His wild parties and reckless habits didn't just derail his career, they robbed the genre of a unique voice that had the potential to stand alongside its greatest legends. Today, his music endures, but his legacy is forever shadowed by the chaos that consumed him. Tanya Tucker. Tanya Tucker burst onto the country music scene as a teenager in the early 1970s with the hit Delta Dawn. At just 13 years old, she became a sensation, her mature voice and commanding stage presence making her seem far beyond her years. Nashville embraced her as a prodigy, a young star destined for a long, legendary career. But growing up in the spotlight came with heavy costs. As Tanya transitioned into adulthood, she embraced a wild lifestyle of late-night parties, high-profile romances, and hard living that threatened to derail her promising future. Unlike many of her peers, Tanya never had the chance to live a normal adolescence. Surrounded by fame, money, and older industry figures, she was drawn into the party culture early. By her late teens and 20s, she was already notorious for her relationships with fellow stars, most famously Glen Campbell, as well as her appetite for partying. Cocaine, alcohol, and wild nights became part of her identity, fueling headlines and overshadowing her music. Throughout the 1980s, Tanya's career teetered between brilliance and collapse. On stage and in the studio, her talent was undeniable. Songs like Love Me Like You Used To and Strong Enough to Bend reminded audiences why she had become a star. But offstage, her reputation for unpredictability grew. Missed shows, erratic performances, and tabloid scandals painted her as country music's wild child. Nashville executives grew cautious, unsure if they could rely on her despite her undeniable draw. The consequences of her partying were real. At times, Tanya's career momentum stalled, with radio programmers hesitant to support her and record labels questioning her stability. Instead of being seen solely as a respected artist, she was often viewed through the lens of gossip and chaos. The wild parties may have made her a media fascination, but they also chipped away at her credibility within the industry. Yet Tanya's story is unique among this list. She found a way to survive. By the 1990s and 2000s, she began rebuilding her career, proving her resilience and reminding fans of her immense talent. She fought her way back into relevance, eventually earning recognition as a veteran who had endured the storm. In 2020, her comeback album, While I'm Livin', even won a Grammy, decades after her initial rise to fame. Tanya Tucker's wild parties certainly threatened to ruin her career, and for a time, they did. But unlike so many others, she managed to claw her way back, her legacy now one of both chaos and redemption. She remains proof that while the party lifestyle can consume even the brightest stars, it doesn't always have to define the final chapter. Tasht Meh, Justin Townes Earle. Justin Townes Earle carried both the gift and the burden of legacy. The son of acclaimed singer-songwriter Steve Earle and the namesake of Townes Van Zandt, Justin was born into a world where music and excess often walked hand in hand. From the moment he stepped onto the scene in the mid-2000s, he was praised as a prodigious talent. His albums like Harlem River Blues and Midnight at the Movies blended folk, Americana, and country with a lyrical depth that promised greatness. But behind the acclaim, Justin battled the same demons that had haunted his father and his namesake: drugs, alcohol, and a lifestyle of wild parties that kept dragging him down. From an early age, Justin struggled with addiction. Fame didn't create his problems, but it magnified them. As his career took off, he became notorious for unpredictable behavior. Nights of heavy drinking and drug use often bled into his professional life. Canceled shows, erratic performances, and public meltdowns painted a portrait of an artist at war with himself. Fans admired his brutal honesty in songwriting, but many worried he wouldn't survive long enough to reach his full potential. Despite his troubles, Justin's artistry shone. Critics hailed him as one of the most important voices of his generation, a man who could weave pain, joy, and reflection into unforgettable songs. But the same raw emotion that fueled his creativity also drove him towards self-destruction. Friends and colleagues described him as brilliant yet fragile, someone who couldn't fully escape the cycle of partying and relapse. The consequences were devastating. While Justin managed to release several acclaimed albums, his momentum was constantly interrupted by rehab stints, canceled tours, and health scares. The very lifestyle that inspired his authenticity also undermined his stability. For every critical triumph, there seemed to be a setback caused by his wild living. Industry insiders wondered what he might accomplish if he could ever fully break free. Tragically, Justin's story ended far too soon. In August 2020, he was found dead at the age of 38 from an accidental overdose involving cocaine laced with fentanyl. The news sent shockwaves through the music world, a painful echo of the struggles that had plagued him for years. Fans mourned not only his loss, but also the unwritten songs, the albums that would never come, and the brilliance cut short. Justin Townes Earle's wild parties didn't just ruin parts of his career, they ultimately claimed his life. His story is one of immense talent overshadowed by addiction, another reminder in country music's long history of how the lure of excess can silence even the most promising voices. Glen Campbell. Glen Campbell was one of country music's most versatile and beloved performers, a man whose crossover appeal made him a household name far beyond Nashville. With classics like Rhinestone Cowboy and Wichita Lineman, Campbell built a career that blended country, pop, and folk, earning Grammy Awards, television specials, and even film roles. For a time in the 1970s, he was one of America's brightest stars, admired for his smooth voice, boyish charm, and dazzling guitar skills. Yet behind the wholesome image, Campbell lived a wild life of late-night parties, alcohol, and cocaine that nearly destroyed both his career and his reputation. Campbell's rise was meteoric, but so was his descent into chaos. At the height of his fame, he was constantly on the road, surrounded by hangers-on, and immersed in a Hollywood meets Nashville party culture. Cocaine became his drug of choice, and it fueled nights of excess that spilled into his work life. His reliability faltered, his performances grew inconsistent, and whispers of addiction began to cloud his once flawless public image. The wild lifestyle also brought Campbell into a string of scandalous relationships. His tumultuous romance with Tanya Tucker in the early 1980s was splashed across tabloids, filled with stories of fights, drugs, and chaotic nights. The pairing of two volatile, party-fueled stars became a media circus that overshadowed their music. Fans who once adored Campbell as a clean-cut rhinestone cowboy now saw a troubled figure unraveling in public. The consequences to his career were sharp. Radio programmers hesitated to support his new material, and television producers grew wary of booking him. His reputation as a family-friendly entertainer had been tarnished by his very public partying and drug use. For a time, it seemed as though Campbell's legacy might be permanently damaged. But unlike many of his peers, Campbell managed to find redemption. By the mid-1980s, he sought help, confronting his addictions and beginning the long process of rebuilding his career. While he never fully escaped the shadow of his wild years, his immense talent carried him back into the spotlight. Later in life, he earned renewed respect through albums, tours, and ultimately his brave farewell project, Adios, recorded while battling Alzheimer's disease. Glen Campbell's story is one of incredible highs and devastating lows. His wild parties and reckless behavior nearly ruined everything he had worked for. Yet he managed to pull himself back, leaving behind a body of work that still shines. His life is a reminder that even the brightest stars can stumble, but sometimes they also rise again, carrying both scars and songs that endure.